Good morning, I'm Maiki Oreta and you're watching Business 360, where we break down the numbers, connect the dots and give you the developments and the insights you need to navigate, adapt and lead. Let's dive right in. Philippine debt climbs to a record 16.63 trillion pesos in February, raising questions on fiscal space and borrowing costs ahead. Trade War Watch, former U.S. President Donald Trump is set to announce new tariffs this week, a move that could roil global markets and hit emerging economies like the Philippines. China turns up the heat around Taiwan with Coast Guard patrols and joint military drills. Potential impacts loom for shipping lanes and tech supply chains in the region. All that and more coming up. First, let's take a look at how global financial markets performed on Monday, starting with developments on Wall Street. Wall Street benchmarks ended mixed on Tuesday after a volatile session as investors braced for the Trump administration's expected tariff announcements. Financial markets have been on edge in recent weeks as President Trump's aggressive trade plans fueled concerns over a potential U.S. slowdown and rising inflationary pressures.
When consumers aren't sure what's happening next week, they pause. When business leaders are unsure, it's not that they're not going to commit capital. It's not that they're going to fire people. They say, let's take a pause. And we have a large part of our economy right now saying, let's take a pause. That doesn't mean we have a problem. It means there's not enough information for confidence to move forward.
The Dow Jones Industrial Average closed flat. The broader S&P 500 added 0.4%, while tech stocks helped lift the Nasdaq Composite by 0.9%. Over in Europe, the UK's FTSE 100 gained 0.6%. Germany's DAX rose by 1.7%, and France's CAC 40 climbed by 1.1%. This as investors welcome stronger than expected manufacturing data and corporate earnings. Now, on a whole, markets remain fragile as global investors weigh trade uncertainties, inflation risks, and central bank signals. Volatility is likely to persist until there's greater clarity on U.S. tariff policies and their impact on global growth. The U.S. is set to unveil a new round of trade tariffs, a move that could send shockwaves through global supply chains, including those linked to the Philippines. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said that the Biden administration plans to announce the measures on April 2nd with a proposed 20% tariff on most imported goods. The White House says the plan aims to promote fairer trade, declaring that the days of America being ripped off are over. But analysts warn that the move could escalate into a broader trade war, potentially disrupting exports and supply chains in emerging markets like the Philippines. Over the weekend, President Donald Trump said reciprocal tariffs will be imposed on countries that maintain duties on U.S. goods. He's expected to unveil his trade platform in a Rose Garden address on Wednesday.
But those days of America, beginning tomorrow, being ripped off are over. American workers and businesses will be put first under President Trump, just as he promised on the campaign trail. The president's historic action tomorrow will improve American competitiveness in every area of industry, reduce our massive trade deficits, and ultimately protect our economic and national security.
The Philippines could face indirect impacts if global trade tensions intensify, especially in key export sectors like electronics and manufacturing that rely on cross-border flows and U.S. demand. On another front, the national government's debt ballooned to a new record high, raising concerns over fiscal sustainability amid efforts to fuel economic growth. The Bureau of Treasury's data shows the outstanding debt stood at 16.63 trillion pesos as of the end of February, nearly 2% higher than the 16.31 trillion pesos recorded in January. The increase was driven by fresh borrowings, both domestic and foreign, to fund priority programs and infrastructure projects under the government's medium-term spending plan. Treasury officials note that the peso appreciation helped ease pressure on foreign debt, with the peso strengthening to 57.99 versus the dollar in February from 58.37 a month earlier. Economists warn that while borrowing help spur development, the growing debt pile highlights the need for stronger revenue collection and prudent spending, as higher debt servicing costs could crowd out investments in social services and other productive sectors. Bank lending rises in February, pointing to ongoing credit demand across key sectors of the economy. Latest data from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas shows bank loans rose to 13.03 trillion pesos, up 12.2% year-on-year from 11.61 trillion pesos in February 2024. However, this was a slight deceleration from the 12.8% growth recorded in January. The BSP says the expansion was fueled by higher lending to the electricity, gas, and air conditioning sector, as well as wholesale and retail trade and the repair of motor vehicles and motorcycles. Analysts say healthy credit growth signals continued business activity, but they caution that sustained momentum will depend on inflation trends, interest rates, and consumer confidence in the coming months. Filipino consumers get a temporary reprieve from price hikes as the Department of Trade and Industry secures a commitment from manufacturers to hold off on increasing prices of essential goods. Trade Secretary Maria Cristina Roque told Business World that producers of basic necessities and prime commodities have agreed to keep prices steady for now, despite the rising costs of raw materials. She acknowledges that some manufacturers have already filed formal requests to adjust prices, but stresses that the DTI's ongoing talks with industry players have been productive, with manufacturers remaining very cooperative. The latest suggested retail price, or SRP, bulletin was released on February 6th, covering 191 stock-keeping units across 28 product categories. Of those, 40% saw price increases, 3% posted declines, while 56% were unchanged. One product cut its quantity but kept its price. Secretary Roque added that there are no new updates yet on the proposed streamlining of the SRP bulletin, first announced by the DTI in July of last year. The agency is considering to delist certain products and retain only core essentials, including sardines, powdered milk, bread, laundry soap, instant noodles, processed meat, and toilet soap. While this price freeze offers short-term relief to consumers still battling high living costs, the DTI faces growing pressure to strike a balance between consumer protection and industry viability as global raw material and logistics costs continue to rise. The Department of Transportation, or DOTR, stands by its decision to raise fares for the light rail transit line 1, insisting that the move is critical for long-term service improvements. The statement comes amid growing pushback from transport and civic groups, who say the fare hike is grossly disadvantageous to commuters, especially amid persistent inflation and stagnant wages. But the DOTR argues that the adjustment is long overdue and necessary to fund upgrades and support the extension of the line to Cavite. The agency also says that the hike will help ensure the rail line's operational viability in the face of rising maintenance and energy costs. Starting today, the maximum fare for a single journey ticket in LRT1 will increase to 55 pesos from the current 45 pesos, while the minimum fare will rise to 20 pesos from 15. The big picture, as the government seeks to modernize mass transit systems and encourage commuters to shift from road to rail, the fare hike raises questions about the balance between cost recovery and affordability, especially for daily wage workers in Metro Manila, where public transport is a lifeline for millions. Agriculture Assistant Secretary for Policy and Planning, Paz Benavides, the second, has been elected as the chairperson of the Commission on Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, or CGRFA. This makes her the first Filipina to hold the position in the commission. The CGRFA is the only permanent intergovernmental body of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, or FAO, dedicated to protecting and promoting biological diversity for food and agriculture. Agriculture Secretary Francisco Tu Laurel Jr. describes her appointment as a major milestone, saying it reflects not only Assistant Secretary Benavides' personal track record, but also highlights the depth of her expertise within the Department of Agriculture. Her election comes at a time when global food systems face mounting pressures from climate change and declining biodiversity. The Philippines' stronger presence in the FAO's top policy-making body is seen as a crucial step towards shaping more resilient and sustainable agriculture policies on the international stage. We're taking a quick break. Please stay with us as we dive deep into the numbers and the narratives that matter most to your bottom line. Welcome back. Let's take a look at how Asian bourses are faring this morning. Let's take a look at how the region is doing over here in Asia. The Nikkei 225 is in the red, lower by just 0.1%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index is in the green, higher by 0.4%. Shanghai's Composite up by as much, up by 0.4% as well. And Singapore's Straits Times Index, just like Japan's, in the red, down by just 0.1%. Now here at home, our markets opened today after a break yesterday in observance of Eid al-Fitr, the Muslim festival marking the end of Ramadan. With trading back in session, investors are watching for key economic data, including manufacturing output and producer prices. These figures are expected to set the tone for the second quarter, as investors monitor domestic demand, inflation pressures, and policy signals from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. Taking a look at the Philippine Stock Exchange Index, we're in the green, up by 0.5% to 6212. All shares index up as well, higher by 0.3% to 3689. Out of all the sub-indices, the financial services and mining and oil counters are in the green sharply, while the industrial, holding firms and property counters are in the red. Now, at the foreign exchange market, the peso opened at 57.20 against the greenback. This is stronger than its previous close of 57.21. Now, Bilyonaryo Manny Villar is now the richest man in the Philippines, topping the Forbes 2025 billionaires list among Filipino tycoons. Latest data from Forbes shows that Villar ranked 117th globally, with a net worth of $17.2 billion as of April 1st. This makes him the wealthiest Filipino this year, a big jump from last year when he placed third among local billionaires. The former senator and one-time presidential candidate is the chairman of property giant Vista Land and Lifescapes, with his biggest asset being his stake in Golden MV Holdings, which consolidates his interests in real estate, retail, and media. Other Filipino billionaires on the 2025 Forbes list include Enrique Razon, Ramon Ang, Lucio Tan, and the C siblings of the SM Group, among others. Villar's ascent reflects the continued strength of the Philippine property and retail sectors and highlights how strategic diversification into media and utilities has helped boost his fortune in a volatile global economy. Cabinet members will no longer attend the Senate hearing on the possible arrest of former President Rodrigo Duterte. In a letter to Senate President Chiz Escudero and Senator Amy Marcos, Executive Secretary Lucas Bersamin said that issues involving executive privilege have already been thoroughly addressed. Bersamin warned that pushing through with the hearing could violate the sub judice rule, with 4 related petitions still pending before the Supreme Court. Senator Amy Marcos expressed disappointment over Malacanang's decision, saying it shuts the door on much-needed transparency from the executive branch.
Alam niyo, maraming tanong pa rin, meeting pa rin kasi preliminary report lang naman ang kinaya ko. Marami pa rin katanungan ng taong bayan. Ang dami nga nagte-text, nagtatanong. Tapos, maraming bagong impormasyon na sana maging pagkakataon para yung mga magulong sagot, yung hindi magkatugma-tugma ng mga datos, at saka yung mga katanungan ng taong bayan, sana pagkakataon yun para maisagot ng ating gobyerno.
The Senate Foreign Relations Committee is still set to hold its second hearing tomorrow, Thursday, April 3rd. While political in nature, the issue is being closely watched by investors as heightened tensions and legal uncertainty could affect market sentiment, policy stability, and the country's investment climate. Elsewhere in the world, the Trump administration kicks off a massive government downsizing with a layoff of 10,000 staffers across major U.S. health agencies. Employees from the Food and Drug Administration and the National Institutes of Health are among those affected, as President Donald Trump and billionaire ally Elon Musk push to shrink the federal workforce and slash spending. The U.S. Health Secretary calls the move a necessary step to streamline operations. But the cuts have raised alarms as they include top scientists involved in public health policy, cancer research, and vaccine approval. The shakeup could weaken U.S. contributions to global health initiatives, disrupting drug regulation, scientific collaboration, and research funding that benefits countries like the Philippines. Now, several China Coast Guard vessels patrol the waters around Taiwan Island on Tuesday in a show of force that coincides with military drills by Beijing's Eastern Theater Command. The Coast Guard also conducts boarding and inspection exercises, including interception and detention operations targeting unwarranted vessels in the area. At the same time, multiple units of the People's Liberation Army launched joint drills surrounding Taiwan in what officials describe as a routine enforcement of the One China policy. A spokesperson from the East China Sea Bureau says the exercises reflect China's efforts to assert legitimate jurisdiction over Taiwan's waters. China's heightened military activity around Taiwan is raising concerns across global markets as investors monitor risks to trade routes, supply chains, and regional stability, particularly for Asian economies like the Philippines that rely on open sea lanes and semiconductor shipments. And that's it for Business 360. I'm Maiki Oreta. Keep it here on BNC, the Bilyonaryo News Channel.